Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Professor Lee Fei Lo, and I'm excited to be your Master of Ceremonies in today's launch. We have attendees from all around Australia today, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and waters around Australia. I'd particularly like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people, on whose lands the NARI offices are located, and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose lands I live and work. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, including members of the stolen generations. So welcome everyone. On behalf of the National Aging Research Institute, or NARI, welcome to the launch of Mindset. Mindset aims to improve the quality of interpreter communication and cognitive assessments for dementia. We were funded by the NHMRC and the Commonwealth Department of Health and Ageing, and we've recently completed the Mindset trial. We're now rolling out Mindset training nationally. This is free training for Australian-based interpreters of any language and level. I'd like to also warmly welcome to the audience today, Commissioner Gabrielle Marchetti from the Victorian Multicultural Commission, NARI board members Janice Besh and Stephen Thomas, and NARI Chairman, Associate Professor Michael Murray. I'd also like to thank our Auslan interpreters, Katie, I hope I'm pointing the right way, that way, Katie and Tiana. Now, some quick housekeeping. If you have any technical issues during the event, please refresh the page and press play to start the event. Press unmute on the event stream and ensure the volume is high up enough. If you experience any further technical difficulties, please chat to us via the tech support button located on the left-hand side of the screen. All right, so let's get on with it. To officially launch Mindset, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mark Painting, Chief Executive Officer for NARI. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much, Lee Fei. As you can see, my name is Mark Painting, the Chief Executive Officer of NARI. For those not familiar with NARI, we're the national standards setting and certification body for the translating and interpreting profession in Australia. I'm very pleased to be here today at the launch of the Mindset program and congratulate everyone that's been involved through the journey. It's been fantastic work. Mindset provides specialist online dementia training for interpreters to improve the cognitive assessments for dementia for people of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. NARI has been a proud participant in the program, contributing $90,000 over the life of the project. We have welcomed the opportunity to collaborate with experts in the field from different backgrounds and perspectives to provide a reliable training resource that is appropriate and tailored to the needs of interpreters, which hasn't existed until now. Some people will be surprised to know there are almost 500,000 Australians living with dementia, and this is certain to increase. As a result, there is growing demand for assessment and care of people living with dementia, including people from non-English speaking backgrounds. As such, cognitive assessments are likely to be an increasing part of interpreters' work into the future. For people who speak more than one language, dementia can mean losing the ability to speak a second language. So people who didn't need an interpreter before may need one in the future. A common symptom of dementia is aphasia, losing the ability to speak and understand others' speech. It's usually mild in the early stages of dementia, but as it advances, verbal abilities typically diminish. Signs of aphasia include speaking in short or incomplete sentences, mixing up words or sounds, speaking incoherent words, and struggling to understand others' conversations. This has major implications for interpreters in their role as part of the assessment. Interpreters need to be mindful of how dementia can affect someone's language abilities. They also need to understand that accuracy is at the core of the cognitive assessment. So for the healthcare professional to undertake such an important assessment, the interpreter needs to accurately convey the key features of speech, including any inaccuracies, nonsense, or repetitions, as these can be symptoms and therefore essential to a reliable diagnosis. These challenges highlight the need for specific training in this area. This training under the Mindset program will equip interpreters with the knowledge they need to better tackle these types of assignments and give them greater confidence in dealing with them. Better equipped interpreters will also benefit the healthcare professional and, more importantly, the patient. This valuable mindset training is now available to all interpreters across Australia, regardless of the level of certification or the language, and I commend the training to all interpreters working in the profession as part of your ongoing professional development. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for sharing those communication difficulties that people with cognitive impairment sometimes have, and why it's so important that our interpreters understand those difficulties and provide appropriate interpretation. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Bianca Brishnath, the lead investigator and the powerhouse behind the Mindset Project. And she's going to give you an overview of mindset training. Welcome, Bianca.
Thanks very much for that warm introduction, Lee Fei. And I'm really excited to be here today to alert you to this opportunity for free training. I'm going to present a few slides just to give you a flavor of the work and what's gone into it. So let's get on to that. The first things first is Lee Fei very kindly describes me as the powerhouse, but really I'm not. There is a very large team that has supported this work. And as you can see, they're listed on the screen there, and Lee Fei was one of them. We bring together a multidisciplinary team of interpreters, of geriatricians, of medical anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, and statisticians. So we're very much multidisciplinary. In addition to the chief investigators and the associate investigators listed there, I really would like to also make a very special shout out to the core research team. Many of you watching might have already engaged with some of these members, but they work very hard and very tirelessly behind the scenes. So special thanks to Dr. Marina Kavuto, who's the project manager for the Mindset study, Miss Simona Markosevska, who has been the research assistant looking after the trial, and Miss Nissa Clark, who's now heading up the implementation and I think is communicating with many hundreds of interpreters around the country. So it's a team effort. I'd also like to acknowledge that, again, this kind of work cannot occur in a vacuum. We've had some fantastic industry support. We've had funding from the NHMRC and the Commonwealth Department of Health and Aging. We've had absolutely outstanding support from NARI, both in terms of cash and in kind. And in addition to that, we've had amazing support from our interpreter partners, from TIS National, from all graduates, as well as from our academic partners, the New South Wales Health Interpreter Service, and also Dementia Australia. So a large breadth of people representing big bodies, representing industry, and representing many different sectors of our community. So again, a team effort. Now, Mark's done a great job setting the scene, and I'll just add a few more points there. That when a person lives with dementia, it can affect their communication and their language. And Mark talked about aphasia being one of the kind of critical aspects of dementia. When we know if you speak English as your second, third, or fourth language, there is a very high risk you might lose it. Often the adage goes that last in, first out in terms of linguistic capability. And the NHMRC, or the National Health and Medical Research Council, and My Aged Care, they recommend that interpreters are used for dementia assessments when you've got clients for whom English may not be their first language. And as Mark also pointed out, dementia is on the rise. And so when we look at the assessments that are done for cognition over the every year, they're ever increasing. And about 40,000 of them in terms of aged care assessments are performed with people from a CALD background every single year. But dementia is a real challenge for interpreters. It's not something I think that is intuitively taught or understood, and it presents a number of significant hurdles to overcome. So let's talk about some of those hurdles. So many of you in your working life as interpreters will be exposed to all kinds of conditions and settings, from health to legal to other forms of community interpreting, etc. And you cannot be an expert in everything all at once. And you might have varying levels of training and understanding. And there are varying levels of knowledge about what culture fair tools that might be used in cognitive assessments. Sometimes when we don't know enough about a subject, we can tend to fall back on tropes or understandings that seem familiar. That can be dangerous when it comes to dementia, because how dementia is described in different languages can be quite pejorative. So let me give you an example. Here are some colloquial ways dementia is described in different languages. So you can see on the screen, I'm not going to read all of these words out to you, but you can see on the screen that they can be quite pejorative. They can create a lot of difficulty and stress during a cognitive assessment if the wrong word is even used to describe dementia. It can derail an interaction quite substantially, and then everybody's got to work very hard to bring it back onto track. So recognizing that these are some of the challenges that interpreters might face, we thus sought, through the Mindset study, to provide some specialist online dementia training for interpreters to improve this mediation of cognitive assessment for people from a CALD background. That is basically to help promote more timely diagnosis, to help promote a better patient and clinician interaction, really through the absolutely vital work of the interpreter themselves. Crucially, the training is about 4 hours long, so it's not short, but it is available online and it is self-paced. It comprises 5 modules, which begins with an overview of what dementia is, some insights into how culture affects dementia and maybe its presentation, the importance of briefings and introductions for a cognitive assessment, how one actually interprets a cognitive assessment and some of the challenges that might arise with disordered speech, a client who might be a bit aggressive or where there's side talk, all those sorts of challenges that do present. And also there's a reiteration of the AUSIT Code of Ethics. The training is available online via the NARI Acorn Learning Management System. It's a very simple, easy to access system, not complicated to use. And the training in and of itself was very much co-designed with interpreters themselves, with clinicians, and with family carers of people with dementia, obviously from a multicultural background. Once we developed the training, we did go ahead and user test it with interpreters to make sure that it actually met their needs before we proceeded to a randomized controlled trial that ultimately enrolled about 127 interpreters. We're still in the thick of evaluating that data, but we will hope to have those results very, very soon. In the interim, we have already commenced rolling out the training because we recognize that interpreters, there is really nothing out there, and the workforce needs support and bolstering in terms of making sure that you have the resources at your fingertips that you need to be able to do your jobs. So that's why we've begun rolling out the training. And we'll also be interviewing interpreters and clinicians to understand how it's impacted their practice. So at this stage 3 national rollout, what we really would like to encourage all interpreters to do, regardless of language or level, is to please take up this training. It's also available to interpreting students, those who are about to enter the workforce. We ask for some very basic information at the beginning to just confirm that you are indeed an interpreter, and just so that we have an understanding of what languages and what skill levels that we're catering to. Then you have access to the training. The assessment following from that is a very short online quiz, and you can retake it as many times as you need, and the pass rate is about 99.4%. So we haven't made it very complicated. We want you to avail of this training, to benefit from it, and to obviously apply it in your practice. You can claim as an interpreter up to 20 PD points for this under the NARI category 1.3 or 2.20, but don't be cheeky and try and claim both, please. But 20 points is pretty generous, we hope. And by the way, if you are here today and watching this as an interpreter, you can claim another 10 PD points from this as well. So do bear that in mind as well. Our goal is to reach about 2,400 interpreters around the country. That's roughly, we think, about 10%, actually it's about 20% of the active interpreter workforce in Australia. And so we really hope we can secure your commitment and buy-in to reach this goal. To date, we've had 941 interpreters register their interests, 563 have gone on to enroll in the training, and almost 400 have already completed it. So this training is available, it's free, it's for you. So we certainly encourage its uptake. And on that note, I think I'm going to stop there and I'll hand back to Li Fei. Thank you, Li Fei.
Thanks, Bianca, for that very clear overview. So Mindset is made by interpreters, older people and their families, dementia clinicians, and adult education specialists. And if you're interested in enrolling in training, I believe there is a link on the website above this screen, up there somewhere. So click if you're interested in registering. I would like to now introduce you to our lovely panelists. If you have questions for the panelists, you can submit them via the Q&A box below, and you can also upvote questions. So our panelists are someone I know cares deeply about dementia and diversity, Eliza Hazlitt, Acting Assistant Secretary of the Dementia Diversity and Design Branch, Department of Health and Aged Care. Welcome, Eliza. We also have Vesna Dragoi, a professional interpreter with our partner in the study, New South Wales Health Interpreters. Welcome, Vesna. We have Dr. Jim Hartvack, Chief Investigator on the Mindset Project. I've had the pleasure of working with Jim for several years now. And Dr. Hung Nguyen, a consultant geriatrician at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. Welcome, Hung. So let me start by asking Eliza a question. Eliza, tell us about some of the work the government is doing to increase interpreter use in health and aged care and why this is important.
Thanks, Li Fei, and thank you to everybody that's dialing in around the country for this really important session. I firstly just wanted to say how pleased I am to be here and you know, as Li Fei said, working in the Department of Health, working on both dementia and diversity issues, this is a fabulous project from our perspective. To see both of those issues brought together in such a wonderful training suite is really wonderful to see. So I guess I'm reminded of work that we've been doing on the National Dementia Action Plan over the last couple of years. And one of the quotes I thought was most powerful through the public consultation on that was someone said that they felt like they'd been catapulted into a foreign country where they didn't know the language and had no map. And that was their experience when they were actually diagnosed with dementia. So if you think about that, and when I was thinking about coming to talk today, I just thought if you overlay that sort of sense of a foreign experience of being you know, diagnosed with dementia, and then the language on top of that for someone from a culturally and linguistically diverse background, I think that just really demonstrates how critical this training is and just how important it is for people living with dementia, their families and carers. So in terms of what the actual government and the Department of Health are actually doing to improve access to translating and interpreting for older people, including people with dementia, but more broadly, the government's investing around $16 million a year, which has been the case since about 2021 in response to the Aged Care Royal Commission. And so we are actually investing that money to actually support translating and interpreting of aged care materials for people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, their families and carers. So one of the key measures is obviously TIS National, which hopefully people have heard a little bit about. It's the government's sort of key translating measure. And so we've actually provided a range of interpreting services through that measure, which includes phone, on-site video interpreting, and hopefully ensuring a seamless communication for discussions related to aged care services. So TIS National has actually provided around 20,000 free interpreting services for aged care providers in the year 2023-2024. So that's a great number, but we know that we would like to see that higher as well. In terms of the translation service, we've actually got a translation provider that's translating a whole range of aged care documentation for individual aged care services, but also for government into a range of languages. And so we've estimated that that's benefited about 250,000 older people recently, with 450 aged care translations in the last 2 years. So that's a really important measure, particularly when we're going through a stage where we are at the moment with so much aged care reform going on, and it's really critical. I mean, there's some complicated detail in some of those documents with the new Aged Care Act and new strength and quality standards. So it's really important for everybody that we communicate clearly and widely with as many people as possible so they understand what those changes mean. And that's really critical for people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, but also for people with dementia. So the role that translators are playing in actually getting that really key information out to people is really vital. So I guess what we're doing, we're really working hard at the moment to make sure that people get those messages. We did a webinar last week with over 500 participants where we actually explained the process about how aged care providers can go about requesting documents being translated, or how they can request an interpreter through My Aged Care and then through TIS National. And we got over 200 questions about that. So we know people are listening, and we're actually responding to all of those questions, and they'll be on the department's website in the next couple of weeks. So we know that there's a real interest, and we're very keen to tap into that. And I guess the other thing that we're doing is that we're really always, I guess, looking to do better and learn more. So we're always really interested in getting feedback about how the service is working from individual translators and interpreters, but also from aged care providers, and most importantly, if we can, from actual people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds that are actually trying to understand that information and engage with the system. So we're looking at things about, do people know about the services? Are there concerns about the types of languages offered potentially? Are there quality or timeliness kind of things that we need to know about and continue to work on? So it's about making sure that people know about these services, they know how to access them, they know how to use them, that the quality is good, and that we're continuing to actually improve the offer that we have in place through the dedicated workforce that we're talking to hopefully today. So there's some of the things that we're currently doing, Lee Fay, but happy to talk about it in more detail. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Eliza. So if you've got questions for Eliza, put them in the Q&A, and they'll pop up for us later. Eliza, congratulations. Often when we go to residential aged care in particular, we see the staff member or the family member doing the interpreting, and sometimes it's not the best form of communication with that older person. So really great to see these initiatives promoting professional interpreting use in aged care. And I have a kind of a question, seeing you asking for feedback, in that we were looking for a glossary of terms for translations for our translators to use, and we couldn't find one. And we were like, is there official terms, for CHSP or My Aged Care? So, and I think Bianca talked about the terms for dementia as well.
Yes,
so it'd be
absolutely.
really helpful, I think, for our professional translator, interpreter colleagues to have a standard glossary of terms that, we could look up easily.
Thank you, Lee Fay.
I'll just like throw that, the thing that we've been having trouble with. Okay, I'm going to go to, sorry, go Eliza.
I was just going to say, it's always great to get practical suggestions. So thank you very much.
I'm going to go to Hong. You're a geriatrician. So what are some of the issues that clinicians face when working with non-English speaking older people?
Thanks, Lee Fay, and thanks for having me on the panel today. So clinicians working with non-English speaking older patients must navigate medical consultations with added language and cultural challenges. Verbal communication may be influenced by the patient's primary language, their regional dialect, and level of formal education. But we also know that non-verbal communication is just as important. And the clinician must be aware of the patient's cultural beliefs and attitudes and how they influence their reactions to illness, interpersonal relationships, familial roles, and matters of life and death. When working up a patient in a dementia diagnostic clinic, we routinely engage in independent interpreters who match as closely as possible the patient's primary language, even when he or she may have some degree of English proficiency in conversation. Our interpreters are crucial in allowing us to conduct our consultation, including our cognitive assessments, and it also influences how we interpret the results and make a diagnosis and provide feedback to patients and families. A knowledgeable and highly skilled interpreter will not only interpret the questions asked, but echo the non-verbal communication skills that we are using, or in some instances, advise us on the cultural nuances that we may not be aware of. They also can put the patient at ease and optimize his or her performance. We know that people from a coloured background often score poorly on cognitive tests and run the risk of being misdiagnosed as dementia because they haven't understood the questions. So it's really important to improve confidence in cognitive assessments to make accurate diagnoses. This means not only accurately diagnosing dementia, but also being able to differentiate it from other causes that can mimic dementia. So this dyad of clinician-interpreter influences the patient-doctor interaction and impacts greatly on patient and family's comfort and satisfaction with the consultation. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. I'm really curious, as a geriatrician, do you use the same interpreters for your cognitive assessments, or do you get to choose, or do you just get who you're given?
Working with Melbourne Health, we do have some in-house interpreters who are invaluable. There are some real gems who are very used to working with us in aged care. And I have a special relationship, and every time they come to see a patient with me, I feel a surge of confidence that I know that we'll be well looked after. But often, working in other settings, we might not have that fortune. And so we rely on a variety of different interpreting services. So really this project to increase awareness of dementia across the board and to really upskill interpreters is going to really help the sector overall.
Yeah, thanks. So really thinking of the interpreter as a core part of the healthcare team sounds the way you're talking, but the way you looked when you thought about your colleagues, I think we could see that. So I'm going to go to Vesna. As a professional interpreter then, what are the challenges interpreters face when you're interpreting cognitive assessments for dementia?
So I will have to disclose that I haven't been interpreting for many, many years, but I do manage a very large service. So within New South Wales Health, there are 5 healthcare interpreter services that work within the public health system. So our interpreters are required to work. Basically, we see everything from the cradle to the grave, and so the work that we do is rather complex. I also want to mention here that within New South Wales Health, we're very proud of the professional development training and opportunities that we provide to our interpreters. And so when we were approached by Bianca back in, I think, 2021, if not even in 2020, to work on this project, this was just a blessing, because we're well aware of how complex this topic is. Within New South Wales Health, we work with aged care and dementia patients. I think we see tens of thousands across all language groups, especially our well-established language groups. So there are numerous challenges. I'd also like to say how refreshing it is. We're all speaking the same language so far, and we all acknowledge the critical role of interpreters within these settings. So talking about some of the challenges, first of all, the interpreters that we work with, they have very diverse backgrounds with varying levels of training and experience. And this, of course, can lead to inconsistencies across interpretations. While some interpreters are highly skilled in medical interpreting, they might lack specific experience with cognitive assessments or dementia care. This disparity can lead to inconsistent quality interpretations, impacting the reliability of the assessment outcomes. We know for a fact that dementia evaluations are multifaceted. They consist of numerous cognitive and neuropsychological tests that are used to evaluate cognitive impairment. We also understand that, validity of tests are extremely important. So cognitive assessments are inherently complex. They involve intricate instructions, abstract concepts, and culturally loaded content that doesn't quite easily translate between some languages. And I love the slide that Bianca showed first and foremost. And I think that's, it's really sad when we think about some of the ways that we describe dementia, and even in our own country, in English, it was senility. Um, so, we've had different terms throughout the years, but we know that in some languages, if people don't have training or a lot of access to resources to understand what the cognitive tests are and how they and why they are conducted the way that they are, then this makes interpretation really difficult. But it also then makes building a rapport and trust with the patients and their families also difficult, because interpreters unfamiliar with dementia may struggle and therefore hinder the patient cooperation. Um, Sometimes if patients feel really uncomfortable with us, it may have a big impact on the way that they open up and are able to communicate with the clinicians. Somebody's already mentioned the family dynamics that further complicate the process. We know that many cold communities, family members are deeply involved in healthcare interactions, and interpreters often then have to manage these dynamics whilst also dealing with the terminology and the difficulty of the assessment. And I think that Eliza mentioned, or maybe Huang, about the importance of clinicians and interpreters working together, therefore, the clinicians understanding the interpreter's role, as well as the interpreters understanding the processes and why clinicians do things the way they do. When we receive complaints, it's usually because an interpreter has had really good intentions to help, but they've hindered, unfortunately, the process. And so, building this working together with the clinicians to train interpreters and train clinicians is really important. I also have to admit that the cognitive load on the interpreter is significant in this topic. They have to process and translate complex information quickly, which can lead to fatigue and errors over time. Nonverbal communication is vital in dementia assessments, as patients often rely on gestures and facial expressions. So time constraints and pressure pose significant challenges. Technology, and I think Eliza already mentioned this, so the increasing use of telehealth introduces additional challenges related to technology. Um, so these are just some of the other challenges. But I think finally, we also need to acknowledge that interpreters may be emotionally affected by the assessments and therefore need to manage their responses while also maintaining their own professionalism. So there are a whole number of things. This is just, in brief, but projects like Mindset are going to enable and equip interpreters with the necessary skills and knowledge to be able to handle dementia assessments effectively and ultimately improving the care of cold Australians.
Thanks so much, Vesna. Through this project, I've grown in respect, I think, for what interpreters do, and your comments, I think, particularly about cognitive load and how much you have to hold your head and then say and express. It's super challenging, I think. So thank you for that. Jim, you were involved in co-designing the training. Tell us things that older people, interpreters, and clinicians thought that were important in the training that we've managed to include.
Thanks, Lee Fei. The training is something that, I mean, there are lots of people watching this launch who are interpreters themselves, and they might be thinking to themselves, should I do this training? And I'm part of the team to convince you to do so, but I might just say a few things, what I know about interpreter training in general, and what is special and different about mindset. For the last 15, 20 years, training has become a prerequisite for anyone wanting to become an interpreter in Australia, which is a great thing. But regardless if you completed a diploma, an advanced diploma, postgraduate one, or even a master's, it's unlikely that your training would have included in it a section or a module which includes how to work in cognitive assessments. And so mindset does offer something which most of the training programs don't offer. And as others have said, training is also, as for practicing interpreters, part of your expectation for professional development. So when we were approaching the design of the training, and Bianca has talked about a number of the elements, and I'll go through some of them, but I'll really emphasize what these things offer for practicing interpreters and why you really will benefit from them. In the first place, the training defines what dementia is, and there are lots of false beliefs, misconceptions about what it is. It gives a clear definition about what it is and also what it isn't. What types of behavior, what types of language belong to those forms of behavior that that can be considered forms of dementia, etc. It also goes through what the usual diagnostic tools are that clinicians use, and the most common one is the rudest one. Um, this is a publicly available diagnostic tool which is used in the training. Other ones are also mentioned as well, so that interpreters can actually familiarize themselves with the diagnostic tools that the clinicians can be using. The second thing is that the training, when you're working in a cognitive assessment, you could be working with an occupational therapist, a gerontologist, you could be working with an aged care worker, you could be working with a neuropsychologist. All of those are different occupations that are relevant to this area. And so the training informs the interpreters about what types of occupational group do what things, what their duties are, etc., and what they bring to an assessment. Because the whole area of aged care services and people with dementia is a big area. The training explains the whole infrastructure. What are the terms? What are the names of the services? How do they work? The acronyms. And Eliza said before, the importance of knowing the terms and the language which is used by clinicians is really important, because as interpreters know, we're obliged to transfer the terms and language used by one party to the other. The training includes culture and dementia, and Bianca gave some wonderful examples of how there can be cultural differences, including the use of pejorative terms to refer to dementia. The important thing is that the training goes over these things, and also the importance of interpreters knowing about how to recognize, let's say, phrases, euphemisms, sayings, etc., that people might use to refer to behaviors that refer to dementia without actually using that word. So the whole language around cognitive decline is presented in the training. Then we come to the interaction itself, let's say the assessment. Before an assessment, the interpreter needs to request and receive a briefing so that they can speak to the clinician to know what roughly they want to do, how many people will be involved, if there'll be a diagnostic tool used, which one, and how you go about structuring that briefing, because the briefing is important. If you come in cold to an interaction and not knowing what it's all about, who you're working with, your standard of interpreting is not as good. And so this training shows an example of a briefing, how it's structured, and how you can accomplish it as an interpreter. Secondly, it goes over what the interpreter's role is during the assessment. And others have talked about this, and we've talked about the importance of accuracy. It's really important that the interpreter conveys into their language what the person says or signs, but not only what they say or sign, but how they do it. So is there perhaps hesitation? Is there some degree of incoherence? Are they scrambling for words? Do they find it difficult to describe things around them? Do they appear to confuse pronouns or what have you? Are there some conspicuous things about their speech or signing that are really important for the clinician, because those are the things that they're going to need in order to make their diagnosis? If they don't have that information conveyed to them by the interpreter, as others have said, that can result in a misdiagnosis, and we don't want that. So the training goes over how you replicate this type of perhaps incoherent speech or signing. And it's harder than it seems or it sounds, because you think, oh, well, you just be, your interpretation is incoherent. It's not as easy as that all the time. So we go over in the training how you do convey this to the clinician, because this is important for them to know. The interpreter's role, it's important, as others have said, that they don't intervene in a way that takes on the clinician's role. The clinician decides what is asked, how many times it's asked, if there's, let's say, a question that they want to elicit. So this is really important, that the interpreter doesn't, with good intentions, do the wrong thing. The role of family members as well. Often there might be a daughter or a son or a friend, etc., present. What if they intervene? What if they try to correct you as the interpreter? Or what if they try and answer on behalf of the other person? How do you deal with this as an interpreter, particularly if it's conveyed in another language that the clinician does not understand? And last but not least, it contains some dilemmas, ethical dilemmas, which often arise in lots of different fields. So, the training encompasses these things as well. And just one last thing, Li-Fei, is I work as a practicing interpreter as well as a trainer, and the languages that I work in now service aging communities, and this is a very common thing for me. But regardless of which language you're working in, we're living in an aging society. So the type of training that the Mindset program provides is relevant to us to a greater degree all the time. And last but not least, it's not just relevant to, let's say, cognitive-based assessments. It has applications to if you're working with a speech pathologist or a neuropsychologist or in other areas, because basically many health-based interactions that have diagnostic tools are structured in the same way that a cognitive assessment is structured. So there's lots to be gained from the training. I hope I've convinced you, those who still haven't undertaken the training, to do so. And as we also know, it does earn you PD points for recertification. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. We did squash quite a lot of content into 4 hours. And I know there was more stuff that we wanted to put in there, but 4 hours was plenty long enough. So sign up for training. There's a link above the stream if you're looking for it, or there'll be a QR code at the end as well. We have some questions from the audience. I think this might be for our geriatrician. How do we understand the mindset of someone with dementia?
Thanks for that, Li-Fei. So I guess a lot of the consultation really begins with gathering information. So with the aid of our interpreter, to really put the patient at ease, such that we can ask them about who they are, what their background is, what informs their personal history up until this point, and what are some of the difficulties in terms of memory and thinking that they may be encountering. So that is, I guess, a window through which we then begin to gain trust, and then to gather a bit more information, not only from patients, but also possibly from family or family carers who are present. We do that usually routinely before we enter on any cognitive testing, because we really want to be able to contextualize what it is that that we're trying to an idea about this person, and it provides a context to interpret, you know, when we do the cognitive tests, like what do the results actually mean for this person as well? And then ultimately, how do we actually help this person at this point in their life? So when we use an interpreter, it's really important that our interpreter be able to really interpret how the patient uses the words and what words they might omit, how they phrase things, and how they express themselves. That's really important for us to be able to take into account.
Thank you. I have a question for Jim. Is Auslan included as a language for interpreting?
Yes, it is. Yes, and we've got 2 Auslan interpreters working with us as well for those present who are Auslan users. So the answer is yes.
Great. Now, a question for the whole panel. I'm not sure I understand this, but maybe someone can explain it to me. It says, would the panel request NARI to actively be involved in specialist medical certification categories to all the languages currently testing is available? Not
So
sure.
I think that question, sorry, Vesna.
I was just going to say, I think that because we're lucky enough to have Mark listening in the background, the way that I interpret the question is that because at the moment, as a specialist healthcare certification is only in some languages. My assumption is that what the question is asking is, will this be extended to all testable NARI languages? If so, I mean, Mark's in the audience, so I'm sure that he will take that back to NARI.
Thanks. Thanks, Vesna. Here we go. Question for Hong. Do you advise that clinicians check the interpreter's credentials? Language service providers do not always engage properly certified interpreters.
I think that's a good question, but I think it's probably more important to work with the interpreter. And like Jim has already talked a bit about, it's really important to lay the scene, especially if I come to a consultation and I know the interpreter and I know that we've worked together well and they understand the type of consultation that we will be having, that's fairly straightforward and easy. If there's an interpreter that I haven't worked with before, then possibly it's important to have a talk beforehand to lay the scene as to, this is what we're going to be doing and this is where the patient's coming from, and these are some of the things that might be important for the interpreter to be mindful of before the consultation. And then during the consultation, it may be at the clinician's discretion to, to see how the consultation is progressing. And if there is not the, the conditions for a viable and productive consultation, then maybe a secondary consultation may be warranted under different circumstances. But more often than not, laying the scene, and having that buy-in from interpreters at the beginning of the consultation usually helps.
I'm trying to kind of interpret what you've said, and it sounds like the briefing is important, which is what Jim also said. But if you aren't confident in what's happening in terms of interpreting, maybe you would pause that assessment and then have a second consultation and try and work better with either different interpreter or brief that interpreter better. Okay, so lots of questions, so thank you for those. So interpreting over the telephone, like a RUDAS test, can an interpreter refuse to proceed if they feel that it's unethical? Jim, I think this might be a question for Jim or Vesna. So the RUDAS is not validated for telephone delivery. It's face-to-face tests originally. So what would an interpreter do?
The question it's the question of whether it's ethical for the interaction to proceed is a decision made by the clinician only, not the interpreter. The interpreter, as we look, cognitive assessments are optimally done on site with the interpreter present. The second best thing is video, where at least the interpreter and both parties have visual contact with the interpreter. And with Auslan, you have to have video. Phone interpreting is really the worst choice, but unfortunately, in people living in regional areas, etc., it's not always possible, and with infrastructure, to have an on-site or video interpreting service there. So if it's done by phone, there are interactional challenges that the interpreter has to hear clearly, to know what they've heard when a person speaks, and to clearly convey what the clinician says to the older person. And they're very, very difficult, so that they need to point out if they are having hearing difficulties, audio, interactional difficulties, conveying to both parties what the other party has said. They have to say this so that the clinician knows, okay, this assessment is fraught by difficulties in by both parties being able to communicate with each other. So it's an interactional challenge for the interpreter, but it is not their call to declare this unethical. That's a call that can be made by the clinician only.
Thanks,
Lisa,
Jim.
could I just add to that,
Yes,
that I
please.
completely agree with that. This is not a question of ethics. So I completely agree with what Jim was saying. And I think that sometimes when we're given a job, we don't understand the background. So there may be reasons. In all cases, we would always suggest for any aged care interactions, face-to-face is the ideal. However, sometimes that's not a possibility, and there are numerous factors around that. So I think it's really important, but I think it's really important for interpreters to understand as well that a diagnosis will never be made based on one assessment or one test. So the RUDAS isn't the only assessment criteria where a dementia diagnosis will be made. So there are numerous tests. There's, both cognitive and observational, and maybe sometimes even medical exams. So I think that interpreters can, if they do, this is where at the debriefing, they may be able to suggest that, or ask, was the patient able to hear them well? Was the clinician able to hear if they're feeling as though, they didn't do a good job? But to decline, we could potentially do more harm than good.
Thank you. I have lots of questions. I'm sorry I can't ask them all. So this will be our last question. How much can an interpreter advise on the patient's language capacity and not overstep our role boundary? Who wants to take it? Jim Besner?
Yeah,
Go on, Jim. I'm happy to add
well,
to you.
how much can an interpreter advise?
Mm.
You only work on what you hear or see. So, we don't know the clients. We simply work with what we hear or see. So we convey into the other language what we hear or see, no more, no less. It should reflect the performance. We're looking at the performance before the person's performance. The clinician is looking to see, okay, I'm going to ask a person a particular set of questions or tasks, and I want to see how they perform. That's what the interpreter is doing, conveying how they perform, what they say, how they do it, etc., to the clinician. And it doesn't go beyond that, because we're not there. We don't know them very well, except for that interaction. It's not up to us to give a diagnosis of that. So that's the limitations of our role. It's not about us making an estimation about people's language capacity. If there are some, let's say, conspicuous things that you can't always convey to the clinician during the interaction, have a debriefing and go over things which, again, are restricted to their performance. Do not give your 2 cents worth about what you think might be happening. Simply restrict it to what things you witnessed or saw, and convey that to the clinician if you weren't able to convey all of those things during the interaction itself.
And this is where training between interprofessional training together with interpreters and clinicians becomes really important, so that we can both understand both our roles and also our limitations. And it is still the clinician who is responsible for that assessment. It's not the interpreter. So the clinician needs to be getting to know their patient, the family. They need to be observing while they're speaking. So there's a lot of other things. It's not just about the language. And I agree with Jim. Sometimes, we believe that we may know, but we don't know the patient. We don't know their background. We don't know their educational background. So, the way that they're answering may not necessarily be due to an impairment. It may actually be due to something else, and that's not our call. So we need to be really careful.
Thanks, Vesna. So your point on interprofessional training, there was a question about whether we're going to train clinicians to work with interpreters. I believe the team has a grant in, and we're hopeful to do that next as an add-on. So you should watch this space, but it'll probably be a few years at least. I would like to thank the panel and Mark and Bianca for speaking today. If you're an interpreter and you haven't done mindset training, again, a plug to sign up. If you work with interpreters and you've already done the training, please spread the word. So email our link to your colleagues, put it in your newsletter, put it on your socials. We really want to work together to raise the bar for interpreting for cognitive assessments in Australia. And I'd like to thank you all for being here. So I'm Li Fei Lo. It's been a pleasure emceeing this event. Thank you for coming. And to finish, we would like to share some success stories from Mindset.